Materials module, there's two kind of levels to the materials module. There is the basic one that comes on every system, which only allows you to list that certain things exist, where they're used, but not where you keep them, how many you've got, your prices and so on. We do have the full materials module, which allows you to set up stores and bins, allows you to account for your parts, carry out stock takes, and so on. Each part within the system is very much kind of like an asset. You've got a lot of information that you can store on here. It needs its own code, its own description, and even its photos. We can see where it's held, your minimum, maximum stock levels. And if you have the purchasing module, you can set up the auto reorder quantity. We get to show the history of it when we've taken delivery, transferred it from one location to another, used it, returned it back into stores. Individual items can have their own attributes, so we can look for parts that will fit because they're a particular size, or in this case, a particular voltage. Parts can have multiple suppliers, and we can link these suppliers in provided they're on our contacts list. Some items will have cost hazards against them, and of course it is very important that we record these on here. You can set up those in the lookup tables and apply them as required to each item. Documents, of course, we will fit documents onto there, and that will be things like our cost notifications, how to use the item. The rest of these tabs are to do with when it's been issued, when it's been used, where we've set it up as being required, whether there's any on order, when they're due in, and any tasks that use this particular part. With all that set up, we can then run through various other things. And if I just go to the home page, you'll see that under the materials area, we have quite a few different things that could be looked into. For example, once we've got all our items on the list, one of the first things I'd want to do would be to carry out a stock take to check that what I have on my ShireSystem matches what is on the shelves in my store, or stores plural. Two types of stock take. We have our rolling stock takes, which just go round in a big circle, never ever ending, much how stock takes feel to me anyway. And we have our standard, which I'll set up to be our formal ones. Once they're completed, they disappear from the list and I would have to set them up again. In any case, whichever one I use, I can put filtering in place to only show certain items. And I can send this out to the stock version of Mobile Pro, so I can walk around my store locations using my barcode scanning, scan the barcodes and say, there we go, I found this part, how many should I have? Type in the number of items I find. We also have the option, of course, to print it out and have someone walk around with paper. Then, of course, they've got to come back to the main system and copy what they've found back onto it. There's the on-screen version. Were I to use the paper one, I'd have to come into here and then type in my responses. I just click on the edit button for that one. You'll be able to see there aren't massive numbers of options on here, but I can include the different types of part. I can include whether they're active items in my stores, inactive, or both. Whether I want to do just COSH or not, or both. Whether I want to do my critical parts. Because one of the options on here is listing parts as critical items. So we can make sure we order the critical items and then worry about the other things later. We can do a stock take on my critical if I wish. This will then update parts that are held on my system. It will adjust the value of the stock items that are held in there, and it will feed through, as with everything else, into the reporting section. The reporting section here highlighting the materials section on the left. The materials section has the most reports of any individual module. And of course, you can see on there, if it's identified items that it believes need reordering, we can run the report on that and of course reorder them. We've got our options for running stock valuation, stock variation. So when I've carried out my stock take, I can run that one and see only the items that were plus or minus above the expected or below the expected level, rather than trying to trawl through a list of everything and just look for the ones with a plus or a minus against them. If we're getting really good with our materials, then we can do things like run a report on the items due to be issued. I would run that one and then check we've got enough on the shelf, and ideally have them out ready for those planned pieces of work when the engineers turn up looking for their parts. We can run a report for barcoding rather than having to print a label out one at a time. You can run a report on here, set it to a particular store, then print out all your labeling and go and place the labeling out all in one go. Let's take a look in my parts catalogue again. One of the things we can do is we can add different types of part in here. And I'm just going to add some extra columns in, just to show you what we've got. Many of the parts on our systems will generally be standard parts. We buy them in, we consume them, we buy some more to replace them. However, we have got, for example, perishable parts, items that have expiry dates. Those can be catered for on here very easily, and as we buy them in, they arrive in our stores, we will place on there their run out date, and then we can issue them by run out date as well. If I look in my perishable tab, I'll see we've got one batch in here of 6 with 481 days left. Were we to get another batch in with a different expiry date, it would show up separately. And when issuing, it would always put the one with the shortest shelf life to the top of the list to prompt us to take that particular batch. Some items will have serialized, they'll have serial numbers on them, and we can cope with that as well. Again, we'll bring them in, we will say that we have a number of them, and then the system will demand to know the serial numbers so that it can be issued by serial number as individual items. Then we're taking account of them as individual items, even though we've got dozens, maybe hundreds. The hardest one to explain is the asset part. These are items that will show up in both the parts list and therefore can be used as part of a work order, but they will also show up in the asset list because they can have work done to them. For example, here we have some scales which are kept in the stores when they're not in use. However, they require to be used on work orders. They are required to have work orders carried out on them. So the expense of that work order goes with the scales and not with anything else. In the case of this conveyor gearbox, it can be used be attached to a conveyor and therefore make the conveyor work. But we can also carry out work against that gearbox. Then its history travels with it no matter where it's in use. If I go to my asset list, I should be able to find that gearbox in the asset list as well. There we go. And I've got, let's extend that one in the stores, and that one's actually in use, which is why it isn't showing up in my parts list right now, because it's attached to a conveyor in line A in the production hall in Southampton. Regardless of the type of part, it could have COSH hazards associated with it. And if I take a look at any of these, under the COSH heading, you can then see the generic COSH hazard against it, and then the specific notes for this particular item. That's great. We've got our stores set up. We've got items on our shelves. We've got them down as standard asset serialized perishable parts, maybe even some COSH against them. We can issue them out in a variety of different ways depending on what we're doing with them. Issuing parts can be done, as you can see at the top there, issue parts to person for later use. I can give it out to somebody, that person temporarily becomes a mobile store. I can link this into an existing work order, so parts that we need to issue for work. Using that middle option there, use part to repair an asset or location, this creates a brand new work order. It also signs it all off in one. Will create the work order. I can just issue a part directly to an asset, a location, or a contact without creating a work order, because sometimes we just need to issue an item it isn't worth creating a work order for. For example, the issuing of uniform, PPE, or tooling to an engineer. Simply issuing a small amount of oil to an asset just to top it up. We don't necessarily need a work order for it. We can also issue items out to a particular cost center because I want to give out all the paper, pens, the rest of the stationery to our admin department. I don't want to account for it item by item. I'll just issue it all out to them. Or in the case of a recent one I was helping a customer with, they have boxes of welding rods to give to the welding department. They don't really want to account for them welding rod by welding rod against work. Regardless of how I do it, it is going to want to know things like the cost center, which can be set up to happen automatically. It's going to want to know what parts need to be issued. When I bring up a part, it's then going to show me how many I've got and where they are. I just need to choose how many I'm taking and where from, and then issue them out. That has now consumed one of those items against that particular work order. If I have multiple items, then I just need to find the next one, and I can search by part code or by description. And again, issue them out. Closing that down, it's now consumed 2 parts against work order 0700. I can now carry on with the rest of my work. You can issue parts through Mobile Pro to existing work orders for engineers. There is also a materials version of Mobile Pro for stores people to issue parts, receive deliveries, carry out stock takes, and check availability. Parts can be returned into stores that weren't used, and we just need to find the part on my list. And there's a variety of ways of searching for it. If I know the code, I know who drew it, or it's for a particular work order, I can search for those items and then return them back into the bin that they came from. So I must be careful to return them to where they originated from, or I'm going to have to update the system elsewhere. Receiving delivery. If you have the purchasing module, then that would be done through purchasing. But we can receive deliveries of items, say what we're receiving, how many we've got, and we can put a price in and so on. Choosing a particular part will then default to the preferred supplier, its location, and the last price that we purchased it at. But we can update it if needs be. Using Mobile Pro to receive delivery is even easier. You can scan a barcode to get your part details up. Transferring parts, you can move items around within your stores, and instead of doing a stock take to say there are 2 there instead of 5, we just need to find the part code, say where it's moving from, and choose where it's moving to. If it's somewhere it hasn't been before, we can choose it from the drop-down list. We've got the ability to adjust part quantities as well without doing a formal stock take. And this shows all the places it's currently recorded as could be stored in, and we can update as required. That allows me to adjust up or down. The ability to write off standard parts is in the system. This only allows me to adjust downwards, put in a reason. It's now adjusted that particular store location by 1 part. It records it as a write-off. Parts due for reorder, yes, I can show them on there. There's all the parts I have where the system says you are below your minimum safe quantity. It shows me the quantity held, and of course the suggested reorder number. It will always suggest that I bring my stock level up to the maximum recommended for that particular location. Allows me to then get in touch with the suppliers and order some. For those who have the purchasing option, you've got the automated reordering where it will take that list. We can filter it into the purchasing and then create our POs from it with the press of a couple of buttons.